The UN Independent International Commission of Inquiry on the Occupied Palestinian Territory, including East Jerusalem and Israel, and yes, that is a name of a singular organization, has recently or yesterday came out with a report of basically a 2 year finding and has said that Israel is committing a genocide. Of course, every news source immediately jumped on this. And we'll go through some of it. We'll talk about what they found out, or rather reiterated. And oh, I'm getting it. And yeah, welcome to the reality show. Joining me today are Marco Richard and Adam Mosov after a while. So it's great to have him on as well. And with that, I'll immediately jump to you, Adam. I mean, I'll read through some of the report, but any starting comments from you?
So, there's a really famous line by a physicist at Columbia University, uh, responding to a presentation where he said, "You're not even wrong." Right? You're just so far off. It's kind of captures the objectivist concept of the arbitrary very well. um, and it's just like it's another day, another one of these alphabet soup groups at the UN accusing Israel of committing genocide. And it's just like it's the same old, right? You read it through, it's like everything the Hamas Ministry of Health has said is accepted without question. Hamas has done nothing wrong. October 7th was an act of resistance, so we don't need to really talk about that. And we just need to talk about how Israel is committing all of these vicious atrocities and horrible crimes. And once again, it's just proof once more that how non-objective international law is, how this is just a weaponized political concept to be used to attack the good, the countries that defend themselves in defense of their citizens' rights and represent the ideals and aspirations of Western civilization.
Yeah, and you started on the international law, and this is like what weirds me out the most. Like in America, if the Supreme Court made a decision, everybody understands, okay, that's the Supreme Court, decided on the case. That is sort of the law of the land now, in short. But with this one, just a few weeks ago, we had the, what is it, International Association of Genocide Scholars. Suddenly, they are the number one authority on deciding what is a genocide, and now this organization is ICJ is completely forgotten about apparently.
Yeah.
I mean, Marco, like a question for like that's the thing about this international law, both international organization and international law. It's apparently we can just decide who actually has authority based on who says the most recent thing.
Well, first of all, do not minimize this work. I mean, these brains worked for 2 years to come up with this BS. It's not something that you just conjure overnight, is it? But yeah, you're right. First of all, let's remind people what the UN is. Just because it's called United Nations and sounds awfully like United States, it's got nothing to do with protection of individual rights from the state. The United nothing really. It's not united. Again, it's not nation. It's made up mainly of illegitimate states. We got Russia and China. They even sit on the Security Council as permanent member with the veto. And then you got a collection of rogue states like Iran, Iraq, all the Saudis, all the Stans, and African countries, all this kind of stuff. So like every dictator, they do not care about the rule of law. Most of the country that make up the EU have either compromised rule of law or none at all. But what happens here? We have an ICJ ruling trial going on where Israel is allowed to defend itself. But dictators don't like that. They just want to act. When they want something, they just do it. They hit their enemies. We've seen Putin with Navalny. We've seen Xi Jinping with, what's his name? Hu Jintao. That's how a tyrant and dictator deal with their enemies. So the UN itself disregards its own procedures and its own institutions and just jumps ahead of the ruling of the ICJ because they need to mobilize people and activists on the ground to attack Israel, whether legally or we will see physically. So this is just a farce. Another, as Adam mentioned, another bunch of buffoons that just come up with something in order to attack openly Israel.
Yeah, for sure. I had to look up this particular organization and check whether it was related to the Francesca Albanese's outfit, but it is different. This particular fungus of an organization sprouted up in May 2021. So this is one of the freshest of the anti-Semite organizations that sticks occupied Palestinian territories in its title and claims to be independent, which is enough to disqualify it, frankly, on its own. And that's before you even look at some of the other organizations that you mentioned, which I'm sure we'll reference again. But yeah, I mean, the fact that these guys have done a report that is full of numbers, and of course, you know, these people know that numbers mean fact. If you say you've looked at 16,000 pieces of evidence, well, you must know the truth, surely, because it's a big number, isn't it? Never mind what the source of that evidence is, or whether it qualifies as evidence, or whether it's got any connection to reality or not. And of course, if you've written a nice fat report that's 72 pages long, you know no one's going to read it, and you don't want them to read it anyway. You just want them to quote the headline, which is what many of the mainstream media have dutifully gone ahead and done, and is then, of course, amplified out into the social media world and is repeated as fact and used to back up other people in other places. It's got no connection to reality. That's the point. And I mean, the court of public opinion has already decided, and the court of public opinion is no different to the court of social media opinion or the court of anti-Semite opinion. You know, a majority view, or the view of a large number of people, doesn't qualify as defining what truth is. The facts on the ground qualify as defining what truth is. Lots of people can be wrong. In a lynching, there's a big group of people and someone who's lynched. It doesn't make the lynchers the correct group just because they're in the majority. So I think, you know, all of that's in this, to be honest. And frankly, this is another organization that you can roll your eyes at in the time it says someone to spout its name and frankly, to ignore. They're irrelevant. And it's just not true. And that's the point which needs to be rammed home. And there are many ways of doing that, which I'm sure we'll get to.
Yeah, and just talking about the report itself, I oftentimes joke that I'm probably the only person that actually reads these reports. And that is a joke, but there is an actual UN report saying that 20% of UN reports get less than 1,000 downloads and only 5% get more than 5,000. So actually, nobody really does actually read those, which would be kind of surprising if you're thinking about the UN, the sort of the biggest source, the biggest organization apparently on everything. And as you said about the how much things they talk about in this report, and you know, I just scroll randomly, and you know, one of the biggest, or one part of sort of deciding if something is a genocide is sort of, is there like a special intent to actually destroy? And they had a section on the speech, or sort of the statements, the genocidal statements, where they said that they had numerous genocidal statements, and they quoted about 3. And those were from October 2023, from Yoav Gallant, Benjamin Netanyahu, and Isaac Herzog. Isaac Herzog is a president who doesn't even have any real influence on what the government is doing. Yoav Gallant is no longer the defense minister. And all of those statements were from 2023. So, yeah.
And the statements were taken out of context and misrepresented as well, because if you actually read the statements, they're talking about Hamas, not Gazans. And there's so much you could say about the details of this report. By the way, it's issued under, it was a special commission, but it was issued under the Human Rights Council at the UN, and they care so much about human rights that they've actually had on that council members like Ayn Rand and other organizations, other dictatorships that literally kill women for not covering their hair and in public, and hang people for being gay. But of course, let's them pontificate on what count as human rights and the protection of people's rights around the world. So so already, right, this report is coming from a corrupt, illegitimate organization, within a already corrupt, illegitimate entity known as the United Nations. But the report, like, it starts off by saying Israel began its genocide on October 7th, 2023, right? And it's like, gee, I wonder what happened on October 7th, 2023. You don't even find out until page 11 that there's an organization called Hamas that somehow did something on October 7th, 2023, but it never really commented on or remarked on. There is nothing about Hamas in this entire taking hostages, holding hostages, using human shields, violating massive numbers of the law of armed conflict, not wearing uniforms, using hospitals, using schools for military and combat operations, so on and so on. None of that is talked about in here. Quoting out of context Israeli officials. The whole thing is like, that's why I said, it's not even wrong. This is just it's just an ejaculation of just pure Jew hatred, and dressing that up in fancy language. And this is exactly how kind of modern nihilists and Nazis, the post-World War II Nazis realized, well, we can't be Nazis anymore because people don't like Nazis anymore after they found out everything we did. So they infiltrated organizations like the UN, and they continued to operate through those types of institutions and twisted and warped what was originally really good, legitimate concepts. If you go back 200 or 300 years, what was originally called the Law of Nations, the Jus Gentium, not the Jus Cogens as it's now known as in international law. But they twisted and warped it into this kind of just pure ideological tool to continue their nihilistic attacks on Western civilization, on the concepts of reason and individual rights, limited government, and countries that represent that, like Israel, which is a bastion of freedom and democracy and liberalism in a very, very dark place in the world.
Yeah, and first we had a super chat on last episode where we talked about Candace Owens. Bull super chatted, thank you so much. He said, Candace probably thinks Arbeit macht frei means something about pride in your work, which of course Arbeit macht frei, I think it's like work sets you free, and it was at the top of, was it Auschwitz or was it the different?
Auschwitz, yeah.
And we had one more super chat from Bulmos. Thank you so much. He says, these morons have about as much authority as Cartman has authority. But yeah, reading a little bit more from, so there was a UN press release after the report, and in the press release they've said, the Commission has been investigating the events on and since 7th of October 2023 for the last 2 years, and concluded that Israeli authorities and Israeli security forces committed 4 of the 5 genocidal acts defined by the 1948 Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, namely killing, causing serious bodily or mental harm, deliberately inflicting conditions of life calculated to bring about the destruction of the Palestinians in whole or in part, and imposing measures intended to prevent births. So I mean, just the first of those can be applied to any war. Like, they are describing war. That's not enough to consider it, yet they always talk about numbers, they always talk about how many people died, which again is relevant when it comes to sort of determining what is a genocide. And then even talking about like destroying Palestinians in whole, in part. I mean, Marco, my question would be, if Israel is really trying to do that, first, what is even the timetable on this? Because it's gonna take decades, or technically it's gonna take infinite amount of years, since the number of Palestinians is growing. And then people forget that, well, depends how you define it, but those people consider Arabs in Israel as Palestinians. So Israel is so genocidal that it wants to kill every Palestinian, but they are okay. I mean, how many Jews was Hitler okay with staying inside of Germany when he was committing a genocide?
Well, yeah, I mean, this report is just another, if you like, piece of the puzzle or the obsession puzzle that the UN has against Israel. I mean, we mentioned before that the number of resolutions and statements that they come out from the UN against Israel is absolutely disproportionate, given the number of actual nefarious events going on in the world. But the number of statements against Israel is just insane, given that Israel is a country of 2,000 people and it's the only democracy in the Middle East, by the way. But yeah, I mean, okay, let's pretend they've got an axe to grind and they got some kind of reason to do what they're doing. Well, first of all, the statement which was made in 1948 about the definition of genocide is quite clear. I mean, if you read it, it's I don't know, I lost it. It's about
Number two.
It's about the perpetrator of genocide is supposed to commit some acts. There are at least 5 of them. With the intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. So, first of all, we've seen a number of times how Israel warns the Gaza before they bomb them. Even yesterday, Razi ran a clip of a phone call of an IDF soldier calling a family in a building that was about to be hit, telling them,
lets Palestinians out who have special health conditions. They need to leave Gaza. I mean, how many Jews left Auschwitz because they had some bad health conditions?
Yeah. So that in itself shows that there is no intent of killing on purpose. But then again, we're talking about Palestinians, which are not a nation. They're not an ethnic group. They are Arabs. They're not a race. They're Arabs. And it's not a religious group because they're Muslims. So Israel is not out to destroy the whole of Israel. But one of the points that actually are action that count for genocide is the forcible transfer of children of the group to another group, which is exactly what Putin is doing, which is exactly what nobody talks about. This obsession with Israel is just similar to the obsession that the left has against, for example, Trump. Donald Trump, the president of the United States, is here in Britain for a state visit today. And there are protests in the streets of London against him. I don't recall protests against Iran, protests against China, protesting against the Uyghur genocide in China, for example. But when it comes to people like democratic places like America, nobody can argue it's not a cradle of democracy, and Israel, which is again the only democratic state in the Middle East, people seem to lose their head about it. Well, it's quite obvious, isn't it? It's the genocidal instinct that these people have against the Jews.
Marco mentioned there the 5 acts which supposedly constitute a genocide according to Geneva Convention. Now, those are, and according to this report, 4 out of 5 of those have been met. And the one that hasn't been met is that one Marco referred to, the forcibly transferring children of one group to another, which is, which is exactly, as Marco mentioned, is exactly what Putin's doing with Ukraine. I think when you look at the other 4, even some of those, frankly, are ridiculous because they talk about killing or serious bodily or mental harm. Well, it is a war. You can't have a war without any killing or any injuries. You don't choose to have a war. Certainly, a war of self-defense is a war to protect yourself. It's to ensure that those who attacked you in the first place, those who initiated force, cannot do so again. And that will involve killing those people who are attempting to kill you. And of course, that's exactly what Israel is trying to do. I think what the Israeli foreign ministry they put it quite nice and pithily at the moment, which is that Hamas falsehoods are being laundered and repeated by others. And that's exactly what's going on here. That's what the UN is doing. They're laundering, they're cleaning up. That what is the source is Hamas propaganda. The source is Hamas propaganda every time, and although that's laundered and cleaned up by some organisation, whether it's Amnesty or the UN or the BBC, and then repeated by somebody who only chooses to cite the one they've heard of most recently, therefore the Hamas is hidden behind the scenes. I mean, look at there's a new disclaimer that the BBC put on their articles. Towards the end of the article, they always quote the Hamas Health Ministry figures of deaths and injuries. And the latest disclaimer which they put on it is the ministry's numbers. This is the Hamas Health Ministry, remember. The ministry's numbers are widely considered reliable. This is according to the BBC. Yet they do not distinguish between civilians and fighters. Well, widely considered reliable because everybody quotes them is not widely considered reliable. That just means everybody blindly quotes them. And to not distinguish between civilians and fighters is the whole point, quite frankly, or is a certainly significant part of the point. But this is the BBC that today is trying to tell us that we should be sympathetic with Palestinian archaeologists who are living in Switzerland, who are having enormous anguish of the destruction of antiquities and ancient treasures in the Gaza Strip at the moment, as if we're witnessing the Islamic State Palmyra again, and that's what the Israelis are trying to do: destroy the.
There are no Palestinian antiquities. There's no such thing as Palestine. This is a fiction. If they're destroying antiquities, it's Jewish antiquities from 4,000 years ago.
Yeah. The only antiquated thing is the culture of death.
Yeah.
And that's what I wipe out. But yeah.
I mean, that's again, I mean, this is just a case study in understanding this kind of, the important, insight that Ayn Rand had between truth, falsity, and the arbitrary. This is the whole thing from start to finish is an example of arbitrary. I mean, you could spend time picking it apart piece by piece, but at the end of the day, the point is that there is no aspect to this that is truth. I mean, and they don't have a concern with truth, right? And even like the BBC doesn't have a concern with truth. It was nice that you call them, the Hamas Health Ministry, but the BBC doesn't call them that. No one calls them that. They all call them the Gaza Health Ministry. So it'd be like calling the Nazi Health Ministry the German Health Ministry, right? And I keep pointing that out on X. I'm like, it's like accepting numbers from them is like accepting the numbers from the Nazis about casualties in World War II. And so, and yet they blithely accept them, right? I mean, they don't care. They don't care that whether they're right or wrong. They don't, and this kind of hand waving, like, well, others consider them reliable, so that's why we're doing it. That's just hand waving to them. If they, if the others didn't consider them reliable, they would have another reason why they would have to consider they would be citing them. Because at the end of the day, this is all about an ideological movement, an ideological attack on Western civilization, of which Jews have always been a representative of that. And in fact, one of my explanations for why anti-Semitism is so prevalent, especially in the modern era, is also because Jews are such an example of a counterexample to the classic neo-Marxist view of the world is divided up between the oppressed and the oppressors. And you can understand everyone in that through that framework. And there's no more better example of a group that has historically been oppressed for thousands of years, has been denied a homeland, has been legally attacked, brutally, it's physically attacked for century after century, is Jews. And yet they have succeeded and been incredibly successful everywhere they've gone, right? So it's kind of an affront to this very kind of nihilistic attempt to just destroy and everything down to just fighting tribes. And so, yeah, I mean, the fact that they even appointed as the head of this commission, right? Nazi Pillay, who's like, if you just Google this person, I mean, you couldn't find a person who I refer to in X as a better example of a Jew-hating harpy than this person. So yeah, I'm sorry. It's just, you could go line by line through it and just spend hours dissecting the factual errors, or I think it's more valuable to call it out for what it is, and to recognize that, they would love for us to be talking about the falsehoods of this stuff, because then that makes people think, oh, I have to go read it. But the better, I think, is just to say the whole thing is corrupt and ideologically driven from the get-go.
We have a super chat from Sahib Aullah. Then thank you so much for a very generous super chat, and sorry if I butchered your last name. We also have a super chat from Bulmus. Thank you so much. He says, I don't understand why Israel doesn't tell the UN they are going to delegitimize it as a result of their aiding, endorsing terrorism, even racism. And again, depends if the idea was that UN is working as it's intended. The fact is, UN has the majority of UN are unfree countries. When it comes to the voting at the UN, it's set up like I don't think there is any justification for like kicking out the country. Like the only country that is being talked about as being kicked out of the UN is Israel, out of all. No talk about North Korea, no talk about Iran, no talk about China, no talk about Russia. They still get their seats. So, I mean, if there is no standard for that country being in, then it is sort of just, well, who votes in what way? I mean, I think earlier Marco said that Israel is getting disproportionate hate. But if the purpose is to hate on Israel, then it's exactly proportionate, right? The UN wants to hate on Israel, and that's what's it being focused on. Like, there is no mechanism in the UN that mandates that it should look at every conflict in the same way, or it should look at every conflict in proportion to how bad it is, right? It's simply who brings up something and who votes for it. That's the only standard there is for the UN. I mean, Adam, any comments on the UN specifically?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well,
No,
go ahead.
no, go ahead.
Well, the fact that there is a notoriously horse trading going on when you want the countries to vote for you or against is kind of it shows how illegitimate the whole process is. It's just a bureaucratic sign off, really. This kind of reports, civil service stuff usually starts with with what they want to do. In this case, they want to show that Israel has committed genocide, and well, they're committing suicide by listening to them. Yeah, and then they build the case around it, and then after 2 years, they produce, after 2 years of fruitful work, they produce this kind of rubbish. Again, it's just to attack Israel, but the point is that they know people are not going to read it. They know the whole thing can be demolished by a 5-year-old. It's exactly like the book that, if you read Atlas Shrugged, that Dr. Ferris wrote, which effectively thrashes the whole idea of knowledge and achievement in order to disarm people intellectually, so that they then comply and they go for the first tag that comes along. And they're doing the same. They're producing this thing in order to provide some, if you like, intellectual cover for all the thugs that we'll see in the future, attacking Israelis across the world, attacking Jews just because they happen to pass by in the street. I mean, we're already seeing an incredibly sinister amount of anti-Semitism on our streets in the West. And this kind of report knowingly will make things worse, because now they're effectively telling their henchmen on the ground, go out there. Now these people are committing suicide, again, genocide. They are openly, and we found evidence that they're doing it. So you can go out and violence is justified. And we're seeing how thin the line between what you think and how you act, hating somebody and moving towards shooting somebody has become, such a thin line nowadays.
Richard, any thought? Or I can bring up something more. Well, first we have one more super chat from Phil. Thank you so much. He says, let's be honest, if this planet time worked backwards and knowing what we know now, who the F would be moronic enough to say, hey, let's have an organization with which includes all the mystic psychos? Well, again, philosophy
I
hasn't
love,
changed.
well, I love Richard's sentiment, as sentiment, but it's like it represents in the U.S. what we would call a rational exuberance, because they did have an example. I mean, the UN came out of the League of Nations, which was the same thing. It was a bunch of wackos and insane stuff, and so I mean, I think if we time warped back, they would do the same thing. I mean, because they did already know. I mean, they are, out of World War I was created the League of Nations, which was the UN, on, 1,000 times worse. And the UN came out of that. I mean, you guys meant, Marco and Richard have rightly mentioned, like, they don't protest when China comes. And, Abbas was just welcomed into England by Starmer, right? I mean, the head of, literally a dictator of the Palestinian Authority. They pay terrorist families, the pay for slave program, they promote terrorism. They did a moment of silence. They held an official moment of silence when Sinwar was killed. It's just, I mean, Palestine is represented in the UN. I mean, this is the whole gimmick. And Mark and Richard rightly said, right? The point is to provide cover, right? Because if evil people are explicit about what they are doing and why they're doing it, right? Good people run from that. And so the point of this is to exactly the point that you guys made, the launder, right? The launder, what Hamas has been doing, what Iran has been doing through Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis and Islamic Jihad and all the other terrorist armies of Iran. The point is to give some type of semblance of cover for these people in the same way that, just brute, mindless, tribal warfare is given cover by fancy academic theories like intersectionality theory and things like that. And at the end of the day, it ends up just resulting in the same thing: brute, unadulterated, savage violence in violation of other people's rights, as we have seen recently in the United States with deliberate killings of Jews and deliberate killings of conservatives that simply because people disagree with them.
We have a super chat from Bulmus. Thank you so much. He says the UN tries to make laws that only apply to Israel. Does that not, by definition, make the UN a literal apartheid entity? Well, that's pretty funny. But that's the problem. UN doesn't make laws. The UN just puts out a bunch of resolutions, and I mean, again, like there is no expectation, yet everybody uses it as an authoritative thing. Like it always says the UN passed a resolution. No, a bunch of dictatorship voted for something. That's what you should say instead of the UN passing a resolution, because that's what in practice is. Again, in America, if the Supreme Court, the president, Congress does something, we know what to do with that information. Like it has an actionable thing in reality. When the UN passes a resolution, it's just it does have a reaction. A bunch of articles are written about how Israel is a terrible state. But just quickly to bring up this organization again that did it, or this commission rather, the Independent International Commission of Inquiry on the Occupied Palestinian Territory, including East Jerusalem and Israel. I think they make those names that long on purpose.
But Daniel, notice the nature of that title. That title defines the entirety of Israel as occupied Palestinian territory. So the very title of the document that accuses Israel of committing genocide is a document calling for the genocide of all Israeli Jews.
Yeah, and even if you go to their website, the first thing the UN website, the first thing you see is a map of Israel, and over all of Judea and Samaria, it has the State of Palestine name. Like, that's lying straight up. Put a map of the area A, area B, and area C, so we have explanation. But saying that all of Judea and Samaria is a state of Palestine, that's straight up lie. Like, if I draw a map of Ukraine-Russian conflict, I'll draw up the current occupation zones. I'll commit that they are rightfully Ukrainian, but I'll draw the sort of the jagged line or something saying, okay, this is like occupied right now by Russia. But saying that all of Judea and Samaria is a state of Palestine that's a straight up propaganda, like trying to like
Daniel,
rear its ugly head.
And it's even worse than that, because they want their cake and eat it too. Again, showing you just how this is just pure, unadulterated, arbitrary assertions in support of an ideological goal of nihilistic genocide of Jews and of attacks on the West. And how do we know that? Because when you ask the so-called experts in international law at the UN, well, why aren't you applying the law of armed conflict to Hamas and to the Palestinian authorities? Their response is, because they're not states, they're not state actors. The law of armed conflicts and human rights law apply to state actors. Well, they're not a state. Well, but then they give them state status when they want to give them state status for what other purposes. So they arbitrarily shift back and forth between, well, not a state, so we can't hold them accountable for. Oh, it's only states that can commit genocide, not not or held accountable to the laws of armed conflict. Well, Hamas isn't a state, so we can't do that for them. But they are a state when we want to give them other types of claims and responsibilities and benefits. And this is like they're literally embracing A and not A at the exact same time. And
they do that also with the whole notion of Palestinian identity in the first place. Given that you're talking about supposedly people who are kept in a concentration camp, a restricted area of Gaza, and also are scattered across the world as a lot of millions of refugees who have the right to return. Supposedly both things are true at once.
I thought you were going to go with, they claim that Gaza was a open air prison and concentration camp, but they also claim at the same time that Gaza was beautiful and incredible, and this is what Israel is destroying with this genocide.
That too, full of lovely antiquities and great relics.
Yeah, I know. It really is. I mean, this is, to enter this world and to take it seriously is to enter into the world of the arbitrary. And then the question is, well, why is it arbitrary? It's because it serves these other purposes. Yeah.
Yeah, and people don't care that it's arbitrary, do they? That is the unthinking times that we live in. So that's why they default to simply repeating the words of some authority that they frankly have never heard of half the time, because it gives them illusion of credibility to what they're saying, and it justifies the fact that they don't do any thinking, don't verify any facts, and don't wish to. That the legitimacy and the authority of the UN is bogus in the first place, but people choose to ignore that fact, don't they? I mean, look at the IAGS as a classic example. I mean, the International Association of Genocide Scholars, the one we covered the other day. I mean, that one is frankly ridiculous, isn't it? That one reminds me of like a rom-com. In a rom-com, almost 10 minutes before the end of a typical rom-com, one particular character, in order to save the day for the hapless couple, normally goes online and self-certifies as a wedding celebrant because the vicar's fallen in the sea or whatever. And that's exactly what they do here, isn't it? They self-certify. I proclaim myself a genocide scholar. And then you can get lines like in The Independent today or a few days ago, it quoted this organization as the largest professional organization of scholars studying genocide. The largest because anyone can self-certify as one.
And pay $30 US.
$30, yeah. Even if you are the Cookie Monster. Yeah, absolutely.
Did you guys talk about last week how then people were
I mean, if somebody is a genocide expert, it is Emperor Palpatine, so I don't think it's necessarily wrong. But even when you go to the coming back to the report and the recommendations of the commission, so I think they have from A to I. And one of the last thing is investigate and punish the commission of genocide and incitement to genocide against the Palestinian population in the Gaza Strip. And I'm wondering, what is really the expectation? Because when there was a genocide in Yugoslavia, we bombed the hell out of them, because that's the only way you can really, do you expect Putin to just stop kidnapping Ukrainian children because you tell him, no, 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 stop doing that. No, the only way, if you truly believe there is something happening, is to bomb the hell out of it. Like, there is no other way. Yet, there is this like weird thing where we believe Israel has been committing genocide for the last 2 years, but we shouldn't really do anything about it. I mean, yeah, maybe stop trading with them. Like, I just don't know how, if they truly believe that Israel is committing genocide. Because Adam, I'm wondering what you think. Because in my world, if somebody is committing a genocide, I'm going there with every army I have. I'm not gonna like wait 2 years to publish a report about if they are or not doing that.
Well, so again, part of it is that, um, it, it again, you're imposing on a framework. Well, I believe in truth and falsity, and so if they really believe this, they should act on it, right? And so again, you have to step out of that framework. This is seriously, this was kind of what I really discovered in a serious way when I went to Israel last year, on a mission, on a law professor mission. And we saw, we watched the film, the 45-minute film of what I refer to as the mosque selfies of October 7th. I mean, the level of the real true commitment to nihilism here is something that people in the West have a really hard time grasping and fully understand, because it's so alien to all of our basic assumptions of how we live our lives, and especially people who are American, either in a sense of life or just have the luck of being born here. They have a especially hard time believing that, because in the American sense of life, we're always, it's always about making your life better and happiness, right? But like seriously, like even like this makes Marxism look clean, right? Because Marxism promises a future, right? Yes, it's not nihilistic. The future, the state will wither away because there'll be a paradise, so workers' paradise, right? There's no promise of a future here. It really is true nihilism, destruction of everything for the sake of destruction. Because at the end, it's this combination, it's this toxic stew of what happened in starting in the 30s and the 40s, where kind of the Islamic theological kind of theological I don't know what the term for it would be, kind of like, but Islamism and Nazism were blended together. And this is what we're experiencing now, right? And so the point of this isn't, are we contradicting ourselves? Like, wow, why aren't we being taken seriously that we're accusing them of genocide, but we're sitting on this report for 2 years before we do anything about it, and we're not even doing anything about it. The point is to undercut Israel and to attack Israel, right? That's the trick, right? So the trick is so that therefore anything that can be done can be justified. So the next October 7th, right? Well, Israel's committing genocide, so of course the next October 7th is 100% justified, right? If Iran gets the bomb and chooses to, is going to nuke Israel, right, as well as nuke the United States, well, why are they doing it? Well, because you guys were committing genocide. The point is to rationalize their destructive choices and actions going forward. That's the point here.
Yeah, I mean, just one more quick thing, and I mentioned it here and there about sort of the death culture of Palestinianism. There is this game I mentioned here and there. I won't mention the name of it because I don't want to promote it, but it's made by a Palestinian game maker, and that game is sort of like a first-person shooter where you can play as Hamas committing October 7th. And that already should like put you on your toes. But when you die in that game, it doesn't say game over or you failed. It says you've become martyr. It's a good thing you've died because you died for the cause. And the end screen for when you die isn't some you failed or something. It's like an angel sort of like touching your hand from above. And that is the Palestinian culture. That like celebration of dying while killing Jews or while trying to kill Jews or maybe even managing to kill some of them. But going back sort of to the sort of this organization. Again, it's so surprising how everybody isn't like I've started seeing about this like Israel is committing a genocide. Originally, I've seen it on my national Slovakia subreddit, and somebody posted something like, "Well, now it's official," and it's like, did you know about this organization yesterday before they published it? Like, apparently, everybody now knows about this organization. Everybody knew all the time about the International Association of Genocide Scholars. Of course, everybody knows how prestigious. And if they came out with it, well, it's official. And you know, I'll commit. I had no idea these organizations exist because they only come to prevalence because they came out against it. Similarly, like this report, how long is it? It's like 60, 70 pages or something. But you had articles written in hours afterwards. Like, was there any serious, like, and it's as Adam, as you said, it's arbitrary. It doesn't matter. Like that report could have been a blank piece of paper with just a headline, and it would have the same exact readings. That's why even the International Association of Genocide Scholars, their deciding on Israel is committing a genocide is like 3 or 2 pages long. When they talked about ISIS, it was like half a page long. So again, it's laughable that it doesn't even matter what it says in there. Marco?
Well, totally. I mean, as I said earlier on, the whole point of this whole exercise is to have the press release. It doesn't matter if there isn't a report behind it. As you said, nobody reads them anyway. But the press release is enough to activate the troops on the ground, isn't it? So, to tell them, okay, they're committing genocide. Do whatever you do is fair game. And you know, if you really want to study genocides, just take half an hour of your time, save the 2 years that these people have spent on it, and read the Charter of Hamas. You know, it's quite obvious it's a genocidal culture, genocidal document, because at the receiving end of the hate is always the Jews. Iran, isn't that a genocidal culture? Killed, destroyed the West, death to America and death to the Jews. The Houthis have got in the banner, you know, death to America, the Jews, a curse on the Jews, in fact, and victory for Islam. I mean, as Adam said, the evil people are quite clear about the intention. The only problem that here in the West, we always give them the benefit of the doubt, because again, a benevolent culture like we are, a culture that favors the productive people, the people with goodwill in terms of it's good to deal with other people on an equal basis, is unheard in these kind of places. That's why women are second-class citizens. That's why gays get thrown off a building. That's why stoning, you know, public stoning and beheadings are spectacles that the dictator used in order to instill fear in the population. So I realize it's hard to believe that these people are as evil as they declare to be, but they are. You know, it's time we woke up, and it's time that we realize that the people who are supporting the Palestinians with the banners, you know, it's not a surprise that the people right now protesting Trump are the usual suspect, like Amnesty International, Extinction Rebellion, the Socialist Worker, all this kind of nihilistic institution that actually want to destroy capitalism, because capitalism is based on the freedom of the individual. They do not want that. If you're free to think. If you're free to think, you can realize that what they tell you to do is wrong and that doesn't stand. So everyone who wants to enslave you will come out on the side of the Palestinians. And that's exactly the kind of stuff that they push every time they say it's free Palestine. They actually mean, you know, enslavement for your mind, think the way I think, and just live on somebody else's values. You know, that's the old Jews, the old point of altruism. Your life doesn't matter. You're just a cog of the big machine.
And I think not only do people cite these organizations, like you mentioned earlier, Daniel, that they've heard of today as if they've heard of them before they came up with these kind of reports, like the IAGS, for example, but also organizations which they have heard of and have cited in the past or referenced in the past, they're then fickle about if they say anything which doesn't then fit well, what the propaganda they're trying to push. Look at even the ICJ, for example. Now we can criticize the ICJ till the cows come home, frankly, but take the Joan Donoghue, the lead judge and former president, who clarified after the recent ICJ announcement that it was a misreading to claim that the ICJ found plausibility that genocide was occurring or was likely to occur. She tried to clarify that after the fact. And yet, because people don't quote that and they don't care about that and they don't want to know that because they just want to go with the initial statement of the case by South Africa at the ICJ, and that's enough for them. You know, it's not about finding the truth. It's about finding a way of claiming that you already know the truth when you're refusing to look at the facts which would expose it as a lie.
Yeah, and we have a super chat from Ginger. Thank you so much. And some of it has to do with, I mean, yeah, the idea of plausibility of genocide, and this is how it works with like every single thing. It's still quoted that Israel killed 500 people at the whichever hospital it was like earlier in the war. It's still like some people still quote the Lancet article about the 186,000 people who are dead. People might remember when I think it was wow, I'm forgetting names. But there was that claim about like what was it, like 14,000 children are gonna die in the next 48 hours, and these are supposedly the highest institutions, the highest individuals who should apply the highest amount of rigor, yet they can just claim that, hey, you know what? In 2 days, 14,000 children are gonna die. Oh, sorry, I was wrong. I just spread a lie to everybody and I was cited with my authority and nothing happened to me. I mean, Adam, when it comes to the UN or any organizations for that matter, there is I think there always should be like certain perimeters of, you know, how we are being successful. But with the UN, nobody pretty much ever gets fired. There is no real sort of judging of like, is the UN doing a good job or is it doing proper? I mean, there is a UN General Assembly going on right now, and I think they'll be voting. I think next week about if about the recognition of the Palestinian state, or sort of more countries starting to recognize it. And if you, I mean, if you only judge the world by what the UN is doing, that apparently there is a war in Gaza and there are things going on in the West, and otherwise the world is good. There is nothing else really going on. I mean, Adam,
Well,
any.
again, I mean, well, you can't. I'm asking, how do you judge? You know, what standard would you apply to the UN? Is like saying, well, how do you evaluate whether Russia is doing a good job or not? Well, like, I mean, like, Putin's doing a good job. I mean, like, well, by Putin's standards, he's doing a great job, right? I mean, again, you know, it's not the point isn't that is doing a bad job or a good job. The point is exactly what we've been talking about, which is it provides cover. It provides a patina of legitimacy to vile, wicked, and evil governments and individuals and ideologies that are really seeking to destroy the exemplars of the modern world, the world that we live in, that has been made possible by science, technology, limited government, protection of rights, and freedoms secured under law, and the rule of law itself. Again, represented par excellence, especially compared to its neighbors, by Israel and Western countries. And it's so it's I mean, so the point isn't, like, oh, they don't know these organizations but they cite them and things of this sort. The point is so to give the people, as Marco and Richard said earlier, the people who don't want to think about these things, who just want to kind of go along with conventional wisdom and conventional for thinking and framing of things, the ability to say this. We saw this with Hannah Einbinder, at the Grammy Awards just the other day, right, where she's like, oh, as a Jew, I separate my Judaism from Israel because Israel is committing genocide. And if you asked her that, she would cite all of these reports. And this is the point, right? The point is that so that unthinking people will support this and give it legitimacy when if they had to face the facts, they wouldn't go close to this with a 10-foot pole, because it's worse than the plague. It's everything that is anti-life.
Marco, any thoughts from you, and where can people find you?
Yes, I mean, again, if the people in the UN were really worried about the so-called Palestinians, the people in Gaza, would just tell them, okay, guys, we're seeing what you're doing, put your weapons down, return the hostages, and suddenly the genocide would end, wouldn't it? If they really wanted to care about the people on the ground, they would just urge them to stop fighting Israel, because Israel hasn't got any intention of fighting a war forever. Israel has always been defending itself since 1948. As soon as they declared themselves as a state, they've been attacked, and they've been under attack since by the same people who pretend to agree on a two-state solution. Again, the two-state solution, we've seen it in Gaza, and we've seen what it led to. So if they want peace, they can have peace, but they clearly don't. And there's no point for us in the West to pretend that supporting the Palestinians means supporting the victims, because the victims right now are holding hostages and they refuse to release them.
Yeah, absolutely. And the point also that we ought to bring to the fore is the fact that if Israel followed any of the measures that is being imposed on it and suggested by any of these organizations or any of these provisions, they would be prolonging the war, the suffering, and their own heightening their own risk of annihilation. Because, I mean, one of the provisions of the ICJ was that the Rafah crossing would be opened and allow for unhindered humanitarian aid to pass through it, which is basically how weapons, rockets and missiles, etc., came through in the first place. So, I mean, the whole idea that Israel should hold back on bringing this war to an end by being decisive and firm and securing the surrender of its enemy and securing the return of its hostages by the surrender of its enemy, not by negotiation with its enemy, then that's the only way it's going to bring it to an end. And to fall into line by attending these fake courts, by quoting or countering the UN's lines, is to fall into the trap of giving them some legitimacy simply by engaging with what nonsense they're talking about.
Adam, any last thoughts from you, and where can people find you?
People can find me at X, Adam Mossoff, I couldn't have said it better than Marco and Richard there. I mean, their comments were fantastic and summarized perfectly what the issues and concerns are. So I just will say, as the kids say today, +1 on what Marco and Richard just said.
Richard, where can people find you? I'm not sure if you said.
Oh, yes. Certainly check out the Briefly Objective sister channel to this. The link's in the description below. Lots of short form material on all the crucial elements of the Israel-Gaza conflict.
And with that, let me also mention about the Irreplaceable Spy Conference. Check out objectivism.co.uk. Not a lot of good news in the last few days, weeks, and years in some cases, but this conference, I think, will be a very good news if you enjoy living on this earth, if you enjoyed having success in real life. So check out objectivism.co.uk, a conference in Southern California, October 25th and 26th. Orange County specifically. So again, objectivism.co.uk. You can buy your tickets there. Thank you guys for joining me today. Thank you everybody for watching, and bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.